Now that you look back, now that you've, you're a few more years into this change that you've made, what do you think you've gained professionally and maybe personally from doing this career change?
I think I gained a confidence, like a trust in myself we talked about this a little bit, but if I am contemplating a big move, to make that decision and know that I have the support system and I guess desire, willpower to like see it through. So I'm grateful for that. I think there's a lot of like introspection that's gone into that. I think I've also gained a huge sense for how valuable the right boss, teammates, network is to make a big move. To anyone contemplating that, I would advise not to think that you're doing that in a vacuum or doing it alone. The right way to do that is with a group of people who support you. This could be colleagues or friends or family, but that's absolutely a learning for me. Like, you don't have to make these big decisions in a vacuum. And I think we live in such a connected world now that one would be remiss to not do their homework before making a big move. Figure out what the pay is, figure out what the lifestyle is, figure out what that boss is like. Figure out what it means to be successful in that new role. Like, find people who can get you those answers, and find people in your current role so that you understand where that might take you in 2, 5, 7 years. Talk to the people who have already been there. And I think that lesson of when I was young and, do I leave my PhD program and I just started it? I thought I had to make this decision on my own. And now I realize that that's just not the case. And so that's one of the big things that I've gained both personally and professionally.
So for mid-career movers, for those who are considering this, I think what I'm hearing you say is find an inner circle that sort of supports you through that. Don't go at it. Don't feel like you need to go at it solo by yourself.
I think that's right. For sure. And then, of course, especially if you're talking about mid-career, you control your resume. So even though you may have done something 10 or 15 years ago, you can control how your brand reads to prospective hiring managers, whether that's LinkedIn, whether that's your resume. And it's funny because sometimes I do have to harken back to things that I was like, yeah, I did work on an airline or a hotel deal. That may be ancient history now, but knowing that industry or having at least played in it for a little while may be valuable down the road. And so I think people get really hung up on their most recent experience and forget that things from the past can be used to shine you in a better light. Even though you may be a little bit out of the loop, the fact that you may have dabbled there separates you from other candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. Thank you for sharing that. And what would you then tell your past you in terms of making the bold career change? Now that you've done, I guess, two rounds of it,
Yeah.
what would you tell past you?
I think the main thing would be to be patient. Especially if we're talking early to mid-career change. But a partner said this to me when I left the law firm to join Google. And I remember feeling so bad. And I was like, I'm leaving you guys high and dry. How are you going to backfill me anytime soon? It sounds so silly because I was a nobody. But he looked me in the eye and he's like, hey, you're great, but we'll be okay without you. And you have a long career ahead of you. You know what I mean? It was so humbling. And he didn't mean it in an offensive way. But it was this lesson that almost all of us can be replaced. So don't worry about that. And also have perspective in any job you have that, unless you're a handful of geniuses in the world, have that perspective that other people can do this, do your best, but if you move, that's fine. And then also be patient. He also said to me, you have 30, maybe even 40 years of work ahead of you. Think about how long that is.
Yeah.
So I understand you have these ambitions, but be patient. Take the steps to get there. Some people catch lightning in a bottle. Don't get me wrong. Most of us don't. And so it's like, make the right step so that it's getting you in the direction you want. Because I think I mentor a lot of people who say are in their 20s and they're frustrated that they're not getting promoted quick enough. With that, they're not in the exact product or company that they see themselves in. And when you give them like, hey, you got 40 years ahead of you, it instantly changes their perspective of what a career means. So I would go back and tell myself that, like, truly you have time to figure it out.
Yeah. And so in fact we're getting to that part where we talk about like what advice would you give, because we talked a lot about the space of mid-career folks, but for someone who's really starting out, what other advice would you share with them?
Yeah, I think one is approach it with humility. Like, it's okay not to have all the answers, but be humble enough to ask the questions and get the information you need. I think the second thing I would say, and when I'm hiring, I really look for this quality, be flexible. Our world, especially if you're in tech, but the world changing very quickly. So the company you're working for may change its mission. The role you've been hired for may change its needs. And the worst thing I think right now is somebody who's rigid, being like, no, you hired me for this role and this is what I do. Well, okay, yeah. I need somebody who can roll with the punches. Whether that's a product, a direction change from leadership, whether that's the market dictating that we have to change, or the team has to look differently, you need that flexibility. Which I think ties into the last point I would make is, I use the word resilience. I think other people could use the word gritty or perseverance. But I think that mentality, especially in these days, is priceless. We will all endure obstacles, personal, professional. I graduated law school in 2009. I got an email from my law firm saying, sorry to break it to you. The job you thought you were starting in a few months doesn't exist.
Yeah.
That's going to happen to me again throughout my career. It's going to happen. Things like that are out of our control will happen to us. And I think that resiliency, that grittiness is a trait that is overlooked. I think it's the most important one people could have.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, you can't study that in school. No degree. There's no degree for that. It's life. Just embracing failures and being willing to try things as they go along.
Yeah, you're right.
So I'll have to ask you the $1 million question, because it's a money question. So, many times, and I talk to many individuals, and they hesitate to make that career change, big or small, because of financial concerns. So how did you manage such concerns for yourself?
Great question, and super relevant, I think, because it was a consideration for me, and it was something to factor in. I think if people get lucky, they can do these bold career changes and the new career pays them way more, and then it's not a question you're asking. Right? But I think for a lot of us, you don't always get the best of both worlds. You may get this amazing opportunity, but at the price of, well, literally, you're not going to make as much. So how do you make that assessment? The first thing I would say is it's a very personal question. It depends on the individual, their circumstance, their partner, their family. And so I can't speak for everyone, but speaking for myself, it was a decision that was born out of open communication with, my wife, significant other. Fortunately, I wasn't leaving the company, right? I was still at Google, but there was a pay discrepancy, and I knew that. But I knew that from doing my homework, from doing my due diligence, talking to people on the business side, talking to people on the legal side, to understand, hey, next year, where would I be? And then the year after that, what does it look like? And how big is this gap going to be over time? And I'd be lying if I was saying this was like only a few bucks here or there. That money over time can add up to be a lot, but then it's a lot in respect to, what do you need? What do I need as an individual? What does my wife, what does our family need? And is that delta going to impact how we live? And if so, that's okay, but like, are we prepared for that? Or is that delta too much because of X, Y, Z? So we had some hard and long conversations around, is this the right thing to do? Thankfully, I have like the most amazing supportive wife, and we were able to find a path forward. But it was not something I buried my head in the sand on. I think that's not something I would advise. And I live in New York, you live in Singapore. I think it's okay to admit that like money is important to some extent because you have a lifestyle that you and your family need to like have, whether that, again, to each their own. But expensive cities, compensation is a material factor in these decisions.
Absolutely. And it takes some planning, as you said. It's not an overnight decision. It's in some respects for you too, right? I think you had been mulling on this for a while before you made that actual jump, and there was a lot of homework that you did before making that move too. So it was intentioned. When it came to this.
It was, yeah. I don't view my move as very risky in the grand scheme of things. I think about people, and it's crossed my mind, probably yours. Do you leave the big safe place like big tech to go to a startup? There, the financial considerations are huge because if it hits big, great. But statistically, we all kind of know the stats. And if it doesn't hit big and you're just getting paid maybe a smaller salary or maybe not the same bonus and certainly not public equity, public stock, that's a big discussion to have. And I haven't had to go through that with, my wife did earlier, but I haven't had to directly. But that I view as a much more serious conversation with, are we willing to take this risk, this bet? Might hit, might not, we'll see.
Yeah, I hear you. And so one last question then, what advice would you give to someone who's considering making a career change, but is still hesitating?
The two things that come to mind immediately. One is trust your gut. Like some people are very unhappy in the role that they're in. It doesn't mean they know which role is going to make them way happier, but listen to yourself. If things start to feel untenable, physically, mentally, relationships with your boss or with your teammates, all these things are factors that tell you, like, are you in a good place or not? I would listen to that. And it's not on the bad side too. Like, if you have a good boss and a good team and you feel happy with your pay and you feel happy with the company, don't take that for granted either. The grass isn't always greener. So for better or for worse, like listen to that inner feeling, self, voice, whatever you call it, we all have it. I think in parallel with that, the second answer to that question is do your homework. Talk to people in the role that you might be interested in. What's work-life balance like? How do you get rewarded? What's career growth? What does that look like? What's this manager like? Do the homework to understand what it would mean to make a move.
Yeah.
And again, similar, what does it mean to stay? Where will I be in 5 years? Is there any room for growth or management or executive, blah, blah, blah? I think that homework is huge. And I empathize with people who say, I know what I'm doing now isn't the right thing, but I'm not 100% sure of where I should be. That's totally normal. I think that just requires a little bit more homework. I might be interested in UX. I might be interested in product. I might be interested in banking. Then you just have to do a little bit more research to understand which feels like the right move.
Yeah.
But I don't know, for people like me, there may never be the perfect landing spot. I'm a pretty curious guy, and I may just continue to make moves throughout my career. But I'll know before I make any move, tap into that network. So I think those are my two pieces of advice.
I love what you said about there may never be a perfect landing spot. Because sometimes when we're thinking about change, people hope that it's foolproof, right? It just works end to end. And the reality is that that exists in theory, but in reality, it's not always going to pan out that way. There may be trade-offs that have to be made, but that will eventually get filled up as you go along. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Alykhan. I really appreciate your pearls of wisdom here for the group, and really enjoyed hearing your story as well. In knowing sort of how you've made major transitions in your life, not just once, but actually twice, and who knows, maybe more to come, with the adventure-seeking side of yourself at play.
Thanks, Leah. This has been great. Really appreciate it. And I don't know if these are words of wisdom or of danger, but I think, it's one of these things. Take from it what you will, because I think some things may resonate and others may not, and that's okay. I think we're all a little different. But this was my true pleasure, especially being the first guest, so thank you very much.
Thank you.